Hey, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer's seminal work, My 60 Memorable Games. In this video, we'll be analyzing game number 28 that Fischer played versus Samuel Reshevsky in Los Angeles in 1961. You're not going to want to miss the crazy conclusion to this match. Before we jump into the analysis, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. Thanks for your support. So, the closest Reshevsky came to the World Championship match was in the Candidates in 1953 when he finished tied for second. He was the only American facing 9 other Soviet players, and allegedly they colluded against him and gave easy draws to Smyslov to ensure that he went to the World Championship match and not Reshevsky. Of course, he had a fierce rivalry with his American counterpart, Bobby Fischer. In 1961, the Piatigorsky family sponsored a match between the two. 16 games played between New York and Los Angeles. We'll be looking at Game 11 here, played in the Beverly Hills Hotel. It would be the last game of the match. We'll talk about what happened at the end of the video. For now, let's jump into the game. After c4, knight f6, d4, we have a transposition into a main line d4 opening. And in game 27, we saw how Fischer played e6 in this position, avoiding his tried and true king's Indian defense. But here he goes back to g6. Knight c3, bishop g7, e4. And castles. Again, Fischer trying to provoke, and we've seen this in earlier videos in the series, trying to provoke this move e5. Transposing into a variation of the 4 pawns attack, which Fischer really thought was really weak. But instead, Reshevsky maintains the tension. He doesn't advance forward, and we're back in more of the main lines of the King's Indian, where black plays pawn to e5, and after castles, knight c6, d5, knight e7, we have the really orthodox variation of the King's Indian defense, where after knight e1, knight d7, Fischer's looking to play the classic King's Indian move, f5. Now, because of this locked pawn structure in the center of the board, okay, both sides should be playing on the flanks. Fischer with black is going to be playing on the king side. Reshevsky with white is going to be looking to play on the queen side. So Fischer's main break is f5. Reshevsky's main break is c5. Knight d3. So that regrouping of the knight is to prepare this move, pawn to c5. Fischer plays f5. And here we have a capture. Now, Fischer says that the strongest move in this position is to play g takes f5 and maintain this mobile, fluid pawn center. But instead, he opted to play knight takes f5. And after f3, his idea was to try to abuse this weak d4 square on white's position and land the knight there. So after knight e4, Fischer plays b6, okay? And his idea is to make this pawn advance c5 harder to achieve. As I mentioned before, that is white's key pawn break in this position on the queen side. And here Fischer criticizes Reshevsky's next move, bishop g5. And this is an instructive move, okay? Because I see this a lot in my students' games where you make a tempting move for your development with gain of tempo by attacking the queen. But it actually helps Fischer's development. The queen is much better placed on e8 than she is on d8. Okay? Reshevsky drops the bishop back to support this advance on the queen side. Fischer plays a nice move, a5, slowing this plan down, at least temporarily. We have rook e1. Reshevsky is threatening to drop the bishop back to f1. So Fischer decides to capture here. And after h6, b3, we see that Reshevsky's plan of getting c5 through is a little bit slow. The move he would like to make here to really accelerate queenside expansion is a3. But here, Fischer would be able to play a4. Okay, really clamping down on the b3 square. And then if b4, he can always take en passant and really mess up white structure on the queen side. So that's why Reshevsky played b3 first. So his plan is a3 and then and only then b4. After g5, a3, now we see kind of the error of playing bishop g5 is that the queen is now in a perfect spot to come to g6 and participate in a kingside attack. So we finally have b4. Fischer plays knight f6, okay, mobilizing this knight and coordinating a key advance on the king side, g4. So Reshevsky plays bishop takes a5 here, but Fischer just plays g4 anyway. Okay, not really worrying too much about what's going on the queen side, because if Reshevsky, now this wasn't the game continuation, but if Reshevsky got greedy and grabs this pawn, after this pretty forced sequence, Fischer would actually win a piece and would be doing really well in all variations. So that's why Reshevsky instead played knight df2, trying to reinforce the king side. Fischer grabs, gaining time against the queen, and plays knight h5, just increasing the pressure on the king side, maybe looking to, at an opportune time, slam this knight into f4. Notice this maneuver comes with gain of time against the queen. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, didn't Fischer have a discovery here with knight takes d5? Not really, because after queen g3, Reshevsky is able to basically equalize. Okay, don't forget Reshevsky's already taken a pawn over here, so material would be equal. So that's why Fischer kept more tension in the position knight h5, which forced the queen to drop back. Then and only then he took back on a5. So Fischer with a really nice initiative building on the king side. Of course, Reshevsky with white needs to look for his own counterplay, which is why he plays rook a c1 in here with the idea of getting this key break c5 through. But Fischer is able to rapidly develop his pieces and meet c5 with knight f4. Nice move. Now there's a lot of pressure on g2. Playing g3 in this position would be really risky, weakening these critical light squares around the king. Notice Fischer in this position still has his light squared bishop, whereas Reshevsky traded it off, so that's not a move Reshevsky wants to make. So instead he plays queen g3, defending. And after bishop takes, rook takes, I will turn it over to you for the first time. So with his next move, Fischer got a significant advantage. Okay, but it takes some tactical awareness to find the move. So have a think, what did Fischer play in this position? Pause your videos. So congratulations if you found the awesome queen sacrifice. Queen takes e4, boom. Great move. With the tactical point being that after knight takes, Fischer's got this fork, knight e2, winning back the queen. So Fischer grabs on g3, plays rook a6 to reinforce his pawn chain. Of course, white's putting a lot of pressure on the base of this chain. And after cd, cd, and a4, let's stop and take stock of this position. Now, we saw in game 27 that Fischer won an imbalance where he had a knight and two pawns versus rook. Here, Fischer's just up a clean exchange, okay? But there are some technical difficulties with converting this. Now, Fischer, in a higher chess sense, should definitely win this position. But if you look at his position, his rooks are a bit uncoordinated. They're split rooks, Okay, and this bishop on g7 is really hemmed in by these pawns, so this is not a very active piece. Meanwhile, white does have this beautiful blockading knight on e4, preventing the advance of this e-pawn, and his dark square bishop has a lot more scope. And, to boot, Reshevsky's rook is nicely placed on the open c-file and is active. So, again, Fischer should be winning this position in a higher chess sense, but there are definitely some difficulties with this conversion. So Fischer starts by playing rook f7, keeping this rook out of the 7th rank. Prudent move. Reshevsky advances, perhaps looking to liquidate one of his doubled pawns. When you're on the defensive side, and Reshevsky definitely is, it's a really good idea to seek pawn exchanges. Okay. Conversely, for Fischer, he's going to look to avoid them, because Reshevsky would love to get into a situation where all the pawns have been exchanged on the board and we're left with, let's say, 2 rooks versus bishop and rook. That would be a theoretical draw. So that's kind of what Reshevsky is aiming for. Bishop f8, Fischer looking to get some activity for this bishop. Both players start centralizing their kings, and Reshevsky decides to infiltrate on the c-file, bringing his rook to an active position. And Fischer does the same, okay? He needs to look for activity for his rook, even at the cost of this pawn, okay? We can't keep the rook in a really passive position like this when black's pieces would be very passive, okay? And white's, conversely, would be very active. So Fischer looks to activate his rook, and Reshevsky can end up scooping up this pawn. Now, in this position, Fischer plays rook f4. Let me back up. The key thing that Fischer needs to do, okay, now Reshevsky has a pawn as compensation, and it's an outside pass pawn. Fischer really needs to break the blockade of this knight on e4, okay, because ideally he would like to look to advance this passed e-pawn, okay. Fischer chose rook f4 here, but he shows that rook e3 would have been the much better way to try to break this blockade, where after knight c3, e4, rook e8, bishop g7, let's say the knight were to grab here, Fischer would have a nice move in this position, bishop e5, disrupting the coordination between the rook and the knight. So this would be a nice way to continue. Instead, he chose rook f4, and Reshevsky played bishop c7, applying maximum pressure to this pawn chain. So Fischer's really forced to capture on e4, which allows Reshevsky to capture on f8. So nice little exchange tactic there by Reshevsky. Fischer plays rook d3, and after rook f6, rook g4, rook takes d6. Fischer errs here. So this really highlights the technical difficulty of converting this position. Rook g7 looks like a nice, normal, solid move, potentially getting behind the pawn, guarding the 7th rank, but it really lets the win slip away from Fischer. Better would have been rook d2, coordinating a counterattack on the g2 pawn, where after rook d7, the king can actually just step up to g6. Reshevsky can win this pawn, but the king actually ends up in a really bad position on the side of the board and can easily be ensnared in a mating net. Notice Reshevsky's bishop on e5 is also en prise, so that definitely would have been the better continuation for Fischer. Instead, Reshevsky is able to play rook c6, defending his bishop that was en prise, rook takes d5, and rook c2. So now Fischer is unable to bring the rook to the 2nd rank and coordinate an attack on the g2 pawn like we saw in the previous variation. So Fischer, definitely frustrated at this point, just starts pushing his passed pawn. What else can he do in this position? a5, rook d3, Bishop f4. Reshevsky trying to blockade this passer. We have rook f7 challenging the bishop. Reshevsky defends with g3, and Fischer continues to advance in this position. Now, Reshevsky definitely in this position missed an easy draw with king g2, okay? With the tactical point being that after rook takes f4, Reshevsky would have this nice in-between move, rook c7, okay, with equality. He wouldn't want to take here on f4. Then Fischer's able to demonstrate his idea, rook d2, forcing the exchange of rooks when this passer is just going through. Okay, so that's why king g2 would have been a nice move in this position, centralizing the king, getting ready to blockade the pawn, knowing that he had rook c7 to get out of this tactic. But instead he played rook c1, where Fischer played rook e7, getting behind his passer. Okay, that's where you want your rooks. Whether you're the defensive or the offensive side, getting your rook behind the pass pawn is a very desirable configuration in these rook endings. So Reshevsky's rook has to go a little bit passive here. Rook e1, looking to apply maximum pressure to this passer and blockade it. Fischer plays rook a3, okay, getting behind Reshevsky's passer, and we have rook e2 blockading. And both players begin to centralize their kings more. Fischer decides to grab on a5, and after rook takes e3, rook a2 check, Fischer missed his last chance for a win in this position. Reshevsky airs with king f3. It would have been much better in this position, according to Fischer's analysis, for Reshevsky to play king h3, okay, preventing Fischer's king from advancing to f5 and then potentially g4. So Fischer kind of returned the favor here. He played rook b7. It would have been much better, now this wasn't the game continuation, for Fischer to play rook takes e3, where after bishop takes e3, king f5 in combination with h5 would have been the way to go. Okay, and of course, if Reshevsky in this position played g4, Fischer would push on with h4. We never want to allow these pawns to liquidate because white would be able to hold this draw. Okay, but that unfortunately was Fischer's really last opportunity to try to win with this imbalance. Reshevsky, after this point, plays a series of nice moves to basically set up a fortress. And after this check in king g4, the players agreed to a draw. Now, I mentioned earlier that this was the 11th game of the match. It was supposed to be a 16-game match. It was the last game because after this, Fischer walked out of the match. Okay, it wasn't necessarily about the result of this game. It had to do with a scheduling conflict. Okay, Reshevsky, who was an Orthodox Jew, wanted the next game moved from the Sabbath to the next day. Fischer protested, walked out of the match, ended up suing Reshevsky, suing the United States Chess Federation. Ultimately, the match and the prize money were awarded to Reshevsky. Very controversial decision, but we will see another game, the last game featured between Reshevsky and Fischer in my 60 memorable games. It's a ways away. It's game 43, but Fischer kind of considered that the default tiebreaker of this match. So in his eyes, this match ended in a 5.5 tie with the old warrior. So this was the start of Fischer getting the reputation of making kind of crazy demands in his matches. But I support Fischer here. I of course support Reshevsky in wanting to move the match away from the Sabbath, but it's very difficult, especially playing at Fischer's level, to move the match time and the match venue with very little notice. So if there's any blame for this match falling apart, unfortunately, it really falls to the organizers, to the Piatigorsky's family, for not anticipating this conflict and scheduling the match on a Saturday to begin with. So, unfortunately, we only got 11 games. Who knows what the players would have had in store for us if they went the distance, played 16. I think Fischer would have won the match, especially with his age advantage. I think Reshevsky definitely would have tired in game 14, 15, 16, and would have lost the match. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this kind of mini series within the series, the last 3 games from this match. Be sure to subscribe, smash that subscribe button, join Team MVP. You're not going to want to miss the next installment of this series, which is game number 29. So we'll be moving away from the Reshevsky match. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you soon.